Open your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. Daniel's in the Old Testament. If you're still learning your way around the Bible, know that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament. And the New Testament is from the birth of Jesus on. It starts with the book of Matthew. The Old Testament is before the birth of Jesus, and it starts in the book of Genesis. So Daniel is in the Old Testament. It's past the middle of the Old Testament. It's past Psalms, it's past Proverbs, past Ecclesiastes. You keep going, and it's when you get to Ezekiel, you have one more book to go, which is Daniel. If you get to Joel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, or anything like that, then you went way too far. So anyway, but Daniel's right there. Daniel chapter 3. We started last week talking about standing firm and loving well. How do we stand firm in a world that there's constantly this conflict, constantly this pressure, even constantly sometimes our old habits and our old ways that are trying to hang on to us or trying to shape us into something other than who God has called us to be and what Jesus has for us. And the truth of the matter is that it is a battle that all of us face, right? I mean, none of us are exempt, are we? None of us are exempt from this challenge of when we go out into this world today and tomorrow, that we're going to encounter things that we'll feel pressured just to be somebody other than who Jesus has called us to be, and to conduct ourselves in a way other than what He's called us to do. And yet, we're called to stand firm. And then on the other hand, we're called to love well. Now, I think about Jesus and how well He did that. I mean, He's the perfect example. I think we can all agree that He stood firm, but He also loved well. One of my favorite passages is in Mark 2. And in Mark 2, you should go read it sometime. Jesus was walking by this tax collector's table named Matthew, and Matthew was not a godly guy. You would not look at him and think, that dude's godly, that dude's religious. Matter of fact, he was anything but. And yet Jesus looked at him and he said, Matthew, you need to follow me. So Matthew got up and left what he knew, and he began to follow Jesus. But the first thing he did was he invited Jesus over. And he invited him over and he fixed dinner for him and all of his friends. Well, if you're not hanging out with people that go to church, who are you hanging out with? People that don't go to church. And so he has all these people come over, and they begin, they're just having dinner with Jesus. And one thing I love about Jesus when you read about Him in the New Testament is that people that were nothing like Him liked Him. Let me say it again. People that were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And here's the thing, He liked them too. And so they liked hanging out with Him. Matter of fact, Mark describes them this way. He says they're like tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. That's, like, who's that? That guy's a doctor. How about her? Well, she's an attorney. Who's that? He's a disreputable sinner. I mean, when that's the label they're putting on you, that means you're really good at being bad. You're well known for how bad you are. And yet here they are hanging out with Jesus. And so I'm real confident that He didn't compromise, but yet He still loved them, right? And so that's who we're called to be. It's what God has called us to do, to stand firm, love well. And so, but some guys that we can look at that did a great job of that are in the book of Daniel. Daniel was one of those guys, but then also three guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had this situation happen where one day King Nebuchadnezzar had built this huge statue. I mean, it was huge, and it was an idol. And so he said, look, at this time of day, there's going to be a trumpet that sounds, and when that trumpet sounds, then the minute it sounds, that wherever you are, you need to stop before it, hit your knees, begin to worship it, and begin to do those things. Well, the day goes on, and up until this moment, there's no difference in what people are doing. They're doing their business, they're conducting their life. The students are going to school, people in the workplace are going to work, people in the community doing things in the community. Everybody looks the same, and yet they're confronted with that one moment where all of a sudden now, if you're going to do what God wants you to do, you're going to have to stand out. And I think that's so descriptive of our lives itself, is that most of our days are kind of just, we're just doing our thing. Well, we're going to work, we're going to school, we're hunting, we're fishing, we're playing ball, if you don't do any of those things, you're doing your own, whatever stuff it is that you do, then we do those things. But every now and then we're confronted with that moment of, who am I going to be in this moment? I mean, most of the time it's just, we're just doing things everybody else does and it's okay. But every now and then there's a moment that arises that's going to require us as Jesus followers not to be like everybody else. And I'm going to call that the fire. what happens in the fire. So in Daniel 3, let me read this to you. So I'll pick you up with where we left, where I was talking about that King Nebuchadnezzar builds this statue. Everybody's going through the day, and then all of a sudden the trumpet blows, and when that happens, everybody hits their knees and falls down wherever they are, except for 3 guys, and here they are standing out, awkwardly standing out. And that's how it feels sometimes, right? To go against the grain in order to please God, in order to follow Jesus at this moment. That it almost feels awkward that I'm like, but they're all doing this. Yeah, I know, but I'm not like them. I'm not called to be like them. In this moment, I'm called to honor God and what I'm supposed to do. So they did that, and here's what happened. Some guys went to the king. Pick up with me, if you would, in verse 12. And it says, "But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse." Everybody say refuse. They refuse to serve your gods. Say your gods. In other words, what happens when they tell us that you have to do this? And again, that's what sometimes, well, why don't you do this? In other words, somebody saying, well, you should do this. And it's contrary to what God wants us to do. So he said, they refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage. We're going to see here later on that Nebuchadnezzar obviously had an anger problem. He could have used Celebrate Recovery there where he was in Babylon. I mean, the dude needed a blue chip for anger. So anyway, he had an anger problem. So it said, he flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." We do not need to defend ourselves before you. So right here, this is what, when we look at what takes place, what happens in the fire, that one of the things that happens in the fire is it really reveals whose approval we're looking for. And again, I like people, and I don't like to hurt anybody. I don't want to disappoint anybody. And I know sometimes, with what in my own humanity, people, you can hurt people or whatever. But sometimes even, I always want to be able to do what people would like to do. But there are times where God requires me to say no, or He requires me to go a different direction, or to not to be pressured into doing what this person's doing or what that person's doing. And sometimes it can be awkward. It can feel uncomfortable. Sometimes people immediately celebrate it and they appreciate it. They understand it. But then there's others that they question why you're doing that. And so, sometimes we're called to do that. And again, when I talk about this, I'm not talking about being religious. Because religious people point their fingers at others and tell them how bad what they're doing is. I'm talking about letting the life of Jesus, a life-giving relationship that we have with Jesus after we've been introduced to a real relationship with Him, living that life through us. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't lecture King Nebuchadnezzar on what he was doing that was wrong. They said, we don't have to answer you on this. In other words, we don't answer to you. Ultimately, we answer to God. So many times when we see darkness in the world, we yell at the darkness. You know what's more effective than yelling at the darkness? Shining your light. All that happens when you yell at the darkness is your voice echoes into the darkness. When you shine your light, it gets attention. And so right here with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, we don't answer to you. We're not looking for your approval. And so today, we're having this conversation, and it's real easy to talk about it today because probably while you're sitting here, you're not going to have too many temptations. I mean, don't misunderstand me. Over the years, there have been times maybe Tina and I have gotten frustrated with each other. I will tell you more often than not what's happened. Years ago, sometimes we would have an argument on the way to church, and I'm getting ready to get up and speak to teenagers, and I lean across and I go, "Hey, I'm sorry about getting in a fight with you." And she goes, "You're just saying that because you're getting ready to get up and preach." And I go, "You're right." And so we have those moments, where you get things right. But I mean, usually there's not a ton of pressure here, usually. A lot of times, most of our pressure takes place when we go out those doors and we go home to the people that we live with, in the neighborhood that we live in the community we live in, with the people we work with and the people we go to school with. There's all these challenges. And every now and then, there's this pressure to try to conform to somebody else's expectations. And it comes down to this: whose approval am I looking for? And sometimes it's not consistent with what somebody else may want of us. But the fire shows whose approval matters. In that moment, we reveal who I really think is important, who I'm really looking to for approval. In that moment, it says that. So number one is this, is that what happens in the fire? We show whose approval matters. I put these things down right here. That there's a struggle that each of us face to conform. And every now and then it just kind of sneaks up on us. It's just in that moment. And that really that this is about surrender. Now, I love our worship team up here. Don't you guys love our worship team? Don't they do a great job? Yeah, man, give them so they do a great job. But I'll just say this, that one of the things that happens so many times, if I use the word worship, we would think about the 20 or 25 minutes that takes place in this part of the service where those guys sing. But real worship that's part of it. But really, tomorrow when you go to your job and you're confronted with this pressure to do or to say or to be something that God has not called you to do or be or say, in that moment when you say, and I love you, but I'm not looking for your approval, I'm looking for His, that's worship. Whenever you surrender those type of things, that becomes an act of worship. Where it's like it's just before Him, like, Lord, this is yours. It's an act of worship. And then it can stand out. To stand out can be uncomfortable. But we get to determine if we walk in the fire of compromise or the fire of conviction. The fire is unavoidable. Which fire are we going to walk in? The one of compromise, where just to appease somebody, just because we feel pressure, just because we even feel a little bullied, that we're going to say yes? Or the fire of conviction that's like, I don't want to disappoint you, and I don't want to hurt you, and I'm sorry if this does, but this is right, and this is what I'm doing. When the life of God, when this life-giving relationship we have with Jesus, when it lives through us like that, there'll be times that lovingly and kindly we stand firm. So number one is this. What happens in the fire? We show whose approval matters. Let's keep reading the point number 2. If we're going to stand firm, then it'll be God's approval who we seek. Daniel 3, verse 17. They said this: if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Now listen to this. So if this happens, who could save me? God can. But even if He doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. We'll never do this. In other words, you giving us our so-called freedom will never be more important than pleasing God. And so whatever that costs us, that's what we're going to do. Now, here's the real challenge, is that I always want to be in control of my own life. I want to be in control. So here's a confession, and I don't know if this is a man thing. Maybe it's not gender related. Maybe it is. But if it is, a lot of you men will recognize it, will probably relate to this. But a lot of times, like we go a place, I like to drive my own car. You say, why is that? Because I want to decide when I leave. And so I like to kind of be in control of, and it's gotten worse as I've gotten. I know, man, y'all pray for me. But it's one of those things. And so in this moment, this is really counterintuitive to who I typically am. In other words, I have to be willing to say, God, this is yours. I'm going to trust the outcome with you. And I love what these guys said. They said, God can deliver us, but even if He doesn't, we're not going to worship what you want us to worship. We're not going to serve the way you want to serve. We're not going to do what you want us to do. We're His. In the American church, I don't know about this all over the world, but in the American church, here's one of the challenges I think we face, is that I personally believe, well, first of all, when we give our lives to Jesus, the very first thing He rescues us from is eternal judgment. We escape hell. And so I'm grateful for Jesus for having done that. But then there's other things that He does for us, is that He loves us. He gives us the grace of God, even in our imperfection. He still, even when I blow it and I'm not perfect, He still loves me. He doesn't abandon me. He helps me as a husband. He helps me as a dad. He helps me as a pastor. He helps me as a husband because he loves my wife. He helps me as a dad because he loves my kids. He helps me as a pastor because he loves you guys. And so as we surrender our life to him, he helps us. But I think sometimes that in all of that, as we talk about those things, that sometimes there's this lack of recognition that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be suffer-free. That we'll be free of suffering just because we're Christians. That there's still struggles that we go through. And sometimes those struggles are things that the enemy puts on us. And other times they're just connected to our willingness to surrender our life and to say, like these guys, God, following you may take me to the fiery furnace, but I'm willing to go. Following you may cost me in this relationship, but I'm willing to follow. Following you may affect the way they view me at this job, but I'm willing to follow. In other words, it doesn't exempt us from the circumstances or consequences always that somebody else would want to inflict upon us. But I haven't surrendered the outcome of it into their hands anyway. I put it in His hands. God, I'm yours. Wherever this takes me, I'll do that. Wherever it leads me, that's the place that I'll go. And that's what real surrender looks like. And so the fire, it reveals we abandon control of the outcome. We abandon control of the outcome. That I'm going to abandon the ability to control this because, again, and not every moment in our life is fire. Not every moment in our life is pressure. A lot of days it's just kind of normal stuff, normal routine. But every now and then that moment pops up. And sometimes we see it coming, and other times it's totally by surprise. So unexpected. And it pops up and it confronts our life, and we're challenged with it. I would dare say probably some of you, you're in the middle of a season of it right now. And others of you, just over the horizon, you see something coming on its way. And there's others of you like, dude, my life is really good right now. Well, I have good news for you. Get ready. Because just over the other side, it's waiting on you. And maybe you'll have the benefit of seeing it before it gets here. But every now and then, it just pops up out of nowhere, right? It's that phone call. It's that thing we were unexpecting. It's that moment that's like, I never saw this coming. Who would have ever thought this was going to happen? Well, it's in that moment that we say, man, God, I just want to please you. I just want to please you. I want your approval. I turn this over to you. It's in your hands. It's in your hands, God. However you want to use me, whatever it is you want to do through me, however I can best honor you and bring you glory, then I want to do that. So number 2 is this, is that we abandon control of the outcome. Let's look at number 3 and we'll close with this. Go with me if you would. You're in Daniel already. Daniel 3, verse 19. So they said to him, they said, we will never serve your gods or worship the goat statue you've set up. And then verse 19 says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This dude had a meltdown. That his face became distorted with rage. Have you ever had anybody get so mad at you their face distorted with rage? Don't look at the person next to you right now. It's not a good time to do that. All right, they may get distorted now. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, listen to this, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. Dude, this had to be some incredible furnace that they were throwing guys in and getting torched at the same time. I mean, what a furnace. I mean, that would have heated places. Anyway, I don't know how I got there. Anyway, so it says, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we certainly did, they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. This is an incredible moment. I mean, they were thrown in, their ropes were tied, all their clothes were on. I mean, nothing would have been any cooler if they wouldn't have. But I mean, it's like all their clothes are on. They're thrown in. And on, thanks, you got it. Anyway, on the way in, the only thing that burns off of them was the rope that held them up. Their clothes were still intact. They didn't even smell like smoke. They didn't even smell like smoke. I mean, and so they have this outcome. Now, here's the thing. And again, will all of our outcomes be like this? No, man. Sometimes in the fire, our lives are taken. But we do it to the glory of God. It's to the glory of God. And so right here that these guys in this moment that serve God's purpose for them to be delivered, and those ropes are just burned off, and they're walking around. And in the fire, Nebuchadnezzar sees Jesus with them. And then he says later on, this verse right here, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says he sent his angel, really when his angel it was Jesus. He sent his angel to rescue the servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Now, this is so important what I'm getting ready to tell you right here. So I really want you to, if you don't get anything else, get this. Here's what the fire shows us. The fire shows us who we've been with and who we spent time with before the fire was there. Because whenever we're in the fire, whatever we've been doing with our life, whoever we've been spending time with, wherever we've been, all of those things are revealed in that moment. Not only is it obvious to us, but it's obvious to those around us that whenever we're in the fire, it's obvious who we've been with. These guys got to walk with Jesus in the fire because they had been walking with Him outside of the fire. And so as we do that, as we encounter that, as we engage in that the fire always reveals where we've been. The fire always reveals with what's been put in us. The fire always reveals with what's been going on in our world. Now, I shared this story before, but I'll tell you again, it's now it's one of my favorite stories. At the time, it was kind of a shameful moment. But when I was much younger, in my early 20s, I played softball. And so we had a team that was pretty good, and we played in some tournaments and stuff like that. And we were in this league, and we were playing that night for first place. And so we're playing this other church. And so, how many of you have ever played church league softball before? So you can guess what's getting ready to happen. So in this church league softball game, it's like the last inning. We're up by 1. They've got a guy on third, and a guy hits the ball into the hole, and the shortstop grabs the ball, and he turns, and I'm playing catcher, and he turns and throws it to home. And so he throws it, and as I catch it, the guy's sliding, and I bring my glove down to tag him, and he takes my feet out from under me, and I fall on top of him. Now, don't worry, I wasn't hurt. He broke my fall. So here's the thing. I knew you were concerned about that. But he was okay. I was okay. He was safe, and so it was a tying run. Well, the guy that was pitching had run home to make sure I still had the ball, and he sees a guy with another jersey running down the third base line, and he thought it was the winning run. And it was actually just the coach in the coach's box on third base coming down to check on his player. So the coach, the guy that's pitching for us, our coach, he takes the ball out of my glove and he tags the guy really hard. And the other guy goes, dude, don't hit me with that ball. And he pops him. What do you expect? These are two churches. So here's the thing, is that, so the bench is clear, all right? It gets better. And so, and don't get me wrong, there's many times that I would have been right in the middle of it, but I was just kind of in a good season where I was kind of like, I'm just going to kind of stand back here and just kind of eat some popcorn and watch the show, So I'll tell you the thing that's so funny is in the same complex you had these industrial teams, and so you see a couple of guys leaning up on the fence, got a beer in their hand, kind of smoking a cigarette. Some guys, hey, what's going on? Just a couple of churches fighting, and so so you had this going on, and finally, as we get through it, eventually they kind of get everything cleared out, and they kick out 3 or 4 guys from each team. It was glorious. We were so God honoring that night, and so all this is happening. And I remember that one of the guys, the guy at shortstop, he was a guy that was always just truly just a godly individual. I'd get around him and his life would just be one that I would aspire to. I'd never see him lose his temper. He was just very, very kind. He was a great athlete. Very competitive, but just always to the glory and honor of God. I really have a great deal of respect for him. And to my surprise that night, he was one of the guys that were just in the middle of this. I'd never seen him like this before. And he was just, again, because like I said, in so much of his life, he had just been this guy where I'm like, man, I want to be like that dude. And so, but in this moment, I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not like that guy. And the way he's pounding on people, I'm so glad he's on my side. And so, I'm watching this take place. And so eventually everybody kind of gets cleared off, settled down. And then, you have that shame creeps in like, how stupid are we? Can you believe this, man? they almost had to call the police, not for the industrial league, but for the church league. They almost had like, a fight's broken out. Yeah, who is it? Is it American Airlines or is this? Oh no, it's Central Christian Church, and So anyway, so after that was all over and everybody settles down, I remember my buddy said, he said this, I've not spent any time with the Lord lately, and when I haven't put that in me, this is who I am. When we got ready that night, we knew it was going to be a game that, and it's kind of silly, but for us, we were all young, competitive. I'm not young anymore, I'm still competitive. But, so we wanted to win and all that kind of thing, but none of us really went out there thinking that this fight was going to break out. I mean, the fire was unexpected. It just all the right circumstances worked out. And in one moment of time, everything goes from just kind of being this tense, competitive thing to all of a sudden kind of this out of control thing. And this guy gave the secret away that's just stuck with me, and I've seen it to be true in my life. On either side, on those moments when I've done what I'm supposed to do, and on those moments when I've done what I'm not supposed to do, and believe you me, I've had both. But he said, I haven't been spending time with Jesus. When I don't spend time with Jesus, this is who I am. He knew that when the fire shows up, that whoever he's been with or who he hasn't been with gets revealed. He's just like me. I'm just like him. We're just like each other. Right? And sometimes we don't get to know, we don't get to predict when the fire's going to happen. Things could be good today, and you go out there and you encounter just the wrong moment, the wrong situation. And whoever you've been with, whoever you've been talking to, if it's Jesus, then he'll show up in that moment. And not only will it be obvious to you, but it'll be obvious to the people that see it. That's the world we get to live in, right? That as Jesus followers, that we're not here to perpetuate this religion. We're here to introduce people to a life-giving relationship with Jesus. And so often, he gets to be revealed most when I'm in the fire because I've spent time with him when there was no fire. Nebuchadnezzar's life was changed. He became a believer, not because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego preached to him and condemned him for the lifestyle that he had. He became a believer because they stood for what they believed in. And in the fire, it was obvious that they'd been with Jesus and that Jesus was with them. And his story was transformed, not because they yelled at his darkness, but because they shined their light. That's how we stand firm. That's how we stand firm in front of a culture, in front of a community that's constantly aware of who we are. Oh, Pastor Rick, I've blown so much. Then apologize well. Repent well. Apologize big. Own it. Let him see Jesus as he walks with you through the fire, as he walks with me through the fire. Who you been talking to? Because your fire could be around the corner. It's been a part of your walk, your relationship. Because that's where we get our life from. I don't want to just be religious and just do it because it's the right thing to do. I want to do it because he's living through me. That's who I want to be. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes for just a minute. And I want us to spend a moment with God. And maybe for you, you're like right smack dab in the middle of it right now. And so it may be time for you just to say, Lord, up to this point, I really haven't asked you what you think. I haven't cared. But Lord, what matters to me is what you want. And Lord, I want to surrender the outcome of this to you.